Session 4 American Online. It was soon after we moved to Crofton that my father brought home our first desktop computer, a compact Presario 425, list price $1399, but purchased at his military discount and initially set up, much to my mother's chagrin, smack in the middle of the dining room table. From the moment it appeared, the computer and I were inseparable. If previously I had been loath to go outside and kick around a ball, now the very idea seemed ludicrous. There was no outside greater than what I could find inside this drab, clunky PC clone, with what felt at that time like an impossibly fast 25 MHz Intel 486 CPU and an inexhaustible 200 MB hard disk. Also, get this, it had a color monitor, an 8-bit color monitor to be precise, which means that it could display up to 256 different colors. Your current device can probably display in the millions. The compact became my constant companion, my second sibling and first love. It came into my life just at the age when I was first discovering an independent self and the multiple words that can simultaneously exist within this world. That process of exploration was so exciting that it made me take for granted and even neglect, for a while at least, the family and life that I already had. Another way of saying this is I was just experiencing the early throes of puberty, but this was a technologized puberty, and the tremendous changes that it wrought in me were, in a way, being wrought everywhere, in everyone. My parents could call my name to tell me to get ready for school, but I wouldn't hear them. They would call my name to tell me to wash up for dinner, but I had pretend not to hear them. And whenever I was reminded that the computer was a shared computer and not my personal machine, I had relinquished my seat with such reluctance that as my father or mother or sister took their turn, they had have to order me out of the room entirely lest I hover moodily over their shoulders and offer advice, showing my sister word processing, macros and shortcuts when she was writing a research paper or giving my parents spreadsheet tip when they tried to do their taxes. I had tried to rush them through their tasks so I could get back to mine, which were so much more important, like playing Loom. As technology had advised, games involved pong paddles and helicopters, the kind my father had played on that by now superannuated Commodore had lost round to ones that realized that at the heart of every computer user was a book reader, a being with a desire not just for sensation but for story. The crude Nintendo, Atari, and Sega games of my childhood, with plots along the lines of, and this is a real example, rescuing the President of the United States from ninjas, now gave way to detailed reimaginings of the ancient tales that I had paged through while lying on the carpet of my grandmother's house. Loom was about a society of weavers whose elders, named after the Greek fates Clotho, Laches, and Atrops, create a secret loom that controls the world, or, according to the script of the game, that weaves subtle patterns of influence into the very fabric of reality. When a young boy discovers the loom's power, he is forced into exile, and everything spirals into chaos until the world decides that a secret fate machine might not be such a great idea. After all, unbelievable, sure, but then again, it's just a game. Still, it wasn't lost on me. Even at that young age, that the titular machine of the game was a symbol of sorts of for the computer on which I was playing in. The loom's rainbow colored threads were like the computer's rainbow colored internal wires. and the lone grey thread that foretold an uncertain future was like the long grey phone cord that came out of the back of the computer and connected it to the great wide world beyond. There, for me, was the true magic. With just this cord, the compact expansion card and modem, and a working phone, I could dial up and connect to something new called the internet. Readers who were born post millennium might not understand the fuss, but trust me, this was a goddamn miracle. Nowadays, connectivity is just presumed. Smartphones, laptops, desktops, everything's connected always. Connected to what exactly? How? It doesn't matter. You just tap the icon, your older relatives call the internet button, and boom, you have got it. The news, pizza delivery, streaming music, and streaming video that we used to call TV and movies back then. However, we walked uphill both ways to and from school and plugged our modems directly into the wall with mainly 12-year-old hands. I'm not saying that I knew much about what the internet was or how exactly I was connecting to it, but I did understand the miraculousness of it all. Because in those days, when you told the computer to connect, you were setting off an entire process wherein the computer would beep and hiss like a traffic jam of snakes, after which, and it could take lifetimes, or at least whole minutes. You could pick up any other phone in the house on an extension line and actually hear the computers talking. You couldn't actually understand what they were saying to each other. Of course, since they were speaking in a machine language that transmitted up to 14,000 symbols per second. Still, even that incomprehension was an astonishingly clear indication that phone calls were no longer just for older teenage sisters. Internet access and the emergence of the web was my generation's Big Bang or Precambrian explosion. It irrevocably altered the course of my life, as it did the lives of everyone. From the age of 12 or so, I tried to spend my every waking moment online. Whenever I couldn't, I was busy planning my next session. The internet was my sanctuary. The web became my jungle gym, my treehouse, my fortress, my classroom without walls. If it were possible, I became more sedentary. If it were possible, I became more pale. Gradually, I stopped sleeping at night and instead slept by day in school. My grades went back into free fall. I wasn't worried by this academic setback. However, and I'm not sure that my parents were either. After all, the education that I was getting online seemed better and even more practical for my future career prospects than anything provided by school. That, at least, was what I kept telling my mother and father. My curiosity felt as vast as the internet itself, a limitless space that was growing exponentially, adding web pages by the day, by the hour, by the minute on subjects I knew nothing about, on subjects I had never heard of before. Yet, the moment that I did hear about them, I had developed an insatiable desire to understand them in their every detail, with few rests or snacks or even toilet breaks allowed. My appetite wasn't limited to serious tech subjects like how to fix a CD-ROM drive. Of course, I also spent plenty of my time on gaming sites, searching for God mode cheat codes for Doom and Quake, but I was generally just so overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information immediately available that I'm not sure I was able to say where one subject ended and another began. A crash course on how to build my own computer led to a crash course in processor architecture, with side excursions into information about martial arts, guns, sports, car, and full disclosure, soft core-ish coffee porn. I sometimes had the feeling that I had to do everything and wasn't going to sign off until I did. It was like I was in a race with the technology, in the same way that some of the teenage boys around me were in a race with one another to see who would grow the tallest or who would get facial hair fast. At school, I was surrounded by kids, some from foreign countries who were just trying to fit in and would expend enormous effort to seem cool, to keep up with the trends. But owning the latest no fear hat and knowing how to bend its brim was child's play. Literally, child's play compared to what I was doing. I found it so thoroughly demanding to keep pace with all the sites and how to tutorials I followed that I started to resent my parents whenever they, in response to a particularly substandard report card or a detention I received, would force me off the computer on a school line. I couldn't bear to have those privileges revoked, disturbed by the thought that every moment that I wasn't online more and more material was appearing that I would be missing. After repeated parental warnings and threats of grounding, I had finally relent and print out whatever file I was reading and bring the dot matrix pages up to bed. I had continued studying in hard copy until my parents had gone to bed themselves, and then I would tiptoe out into the dark, wary of the squeaky door and the creaky floorboards by the stairs. I would keep the lights off and guiding myself by the glow of the screen. So I would wake the computer up and go online, holding my pillows against the machine to stifle the dull tone of the modem and the ever intensifying hiss of its connection. How can I explain it to someone who wasn't there? My younger readers, with their younger standards, might think of the nascent internet as way too slow, the nascent web as too ugly and unentertaining. But that would be wrong. Back then, being online was another life, considered by most to be separate and distant from real life. The virtual and the actual had not yet merged, and it was up to each individual user to determine for themselves where one ended and the other began. It was precisely this that was so inspiring, the freedom to imagine something entirely new, the freedom to start over. Whatever Web 1.0 might have lacked in user friendliness and design sensibility, it more than made up for by its fostering of experimentation and originality of expression, and by its emphasis on the creative primacy of the individual. A typical Geocities site, for example, might have a flashing background that alternated between green and blue, with white text scrolling like an exclamatory charen across the middle. Read this first. Below the .gif of a dancing hamster, but to me, all these kludgy quirks and ticks of amateur production merely indicated that the guiding intelligence behind the site was human and unique. Computer science professors and system engineers, moonlighting English majors and mouth breathing, basement dwelling armchair political economists were all only too happy to share their research and convictions, not for any financial reward, but merely to win converts to their cause. And whether that cause was PC or Mac, macrobiotic diets, or the abolition of the death penalty, I was interested. I was interested because they were enthused. Many of these strange and brilliant people could even be contacted and were quite pleased to answer my questions by the forms. Click this hyperlink or copy and paste it into your browser and the email address provided on their sites. As the millennium approached, the online world would become increasingly centralized and consolidated, with both governments and the businesses accelerating their attempts to intervene in what had always been a fundamentally peer-to-peer relationship. But for one brief and beautiful stretch of time, a stretch that fortunately for me, coincided almost exactly with my adolescence. The internet was mostly made of, by, and for the people. Its purpose was to enlighten, not to monetize, and it was administered more by a provisional cluster of perpetually shifting collective norms than by exploitative, globally enforceable terms of service agreements. To this day, I consider the 1990s online to have been the most pleasant and successful anarchy I have been ever experienced.